in this Gen X phase here, and I'm exactly that number. I'm 48. So, it's a challenge, right? The benefit is starting early. So the earlier you get started, the better. But I think the bottom line is for those that might find themselves behind the eight ball, so to speak, it is time for them to figure out their way and figure out a way to start putting more towards their retirement, because I think what we're seeing now is really a result of many of the changes that have taken place over the last couple of decades, as far as the shift from defined, benefit plans to now defined contribution plans, where we're going to be responsible for our own retirement. So if you're not there yet and you're not above the median and you're well below, it's time to really get started in a big way.
To see violence, and that's the case with local street vendors, with a recent incident of an ice cream man getting robbed multiple times, as seen in the Citizen app. In response to reports of violence, San Jose city leaders held a workshop to help them achieve economic success and job safety.
We want to make sure that everyone in our city has economic opportunity. We also have a responsibility for ensuring the public safety. We have rules for a reason. We make sure that people follow health codes through our partners at the county. We need to maintain our public right-of-way, ensure people can safely navigate our downtown. But at the same time, I want to see our vendors be able to earn an honest living there.
The California Street Vendors Initiative claims that the state retail food code is outdated and no longer relevant to street food vendors. Local services joined the Silicon Valley workshop to try and help.
So our role is to help them to figure out what they're going to trigger and then shepherd them through those processes to get their businesses open as quickly as possible.
So if you're opening a business and you don't know where to go, come talk to us and we'll help you figure it out, help you navigate.
We talk to a lot of people that are, suffering from wage theft that might not be documented, but I think that's the big issue right there, where even if you're undocumented, you have rights.
One specialist said her organization created special loans to fit the needs of vendors.
We're able to approve loans without needing great income, proof of income, 2 years tax returns. We're willing to work with every individual to better serve the community, yes.
For us, it gives me hope that and I feel grateful for a team that is giving people the tools in order to become more self-sufficient and to determine what their futures are going to be like.
To do chores, earning the name full-time children. But at the same time, China has ramped up oil imports, setting a new record last month for over 40% increase from last year. That's despite the country pumping out its own record amount of oil, ranking 5th in the world. Those inconsistencies have led some reports to suggest China is hoarding oil. As
there you are.
It's still unknown. A top ministry in Beijing now urging civilians to join the country's anti-spying efforts. China's State Security Ministry just launched an official account on WeChat, a popular Chinese social media platform. It's Beijing's top foreign intelligence gathering agency. In its first post Tuesday, it suggested the country should encourage citizens to participate in counter-espionage work, going on to propose ways for people to report suspicious activity and rewards for doing so, adding the Chinese system must make anti-spying work, quote, normal for the public to do. The message appears to line up with another recent development, China's revised anti-espionage law taking effect. The rule strongly ups the punishment for anything Beijing deems spying, including the transfer of information related to China's national security, but it doesn't clearly define what that means. The vagueness has Western nations concerned, mainly for foreign companies operating inside China, saying that normal business operations could be deemed criminal. Under China's new law, spying offenses could bring on punishments like arbitrary detention, life in prison, or even execution. To help sniff out so-called offenders, the rule grants Chinese authorities new power to access data, electronic communication, and details on personal property. And the state ministry's message suggests they're now calling on citizens to help.
We have to stop this. We have to be the voices to raise awareness and stop this.
And what you can do to help get involved to bring awareness in your area.
You get involved, you donate, you start asking questions, you start following policy, you start paying attention. Just stop being ignorant and not doing something about the problem. Asking your local police department and your counties what they're doing and how you can help them with resources to continue to fight the battle.
For information on ways to help fight human trafficking, you can visit www.state.gov/20waysyoucanhelpfighthumantrafficking.com. Christina Corona, NTD News, California.
As you've seen, the U.S. is a top destination for this horrific industry. And as Heritage Foundation Research Associate Emma Waters tells me, it's happening right beneath our noses. Emma, thanks so much for joining us. You've written about the 4 main factors that aggravate child trafficking. The crisis at the southern border comes in on top. Could you tell us more about what's happening there?
So it's estimated that 435 unaccompanied minors come to the southern border every day. And some studies suggest that up to 60% of these boys and girls will be exploited in sex trafficking. So oftentimes, in order to make it to the southern border, they work with drug cartels or traffickers. But upon reaching the United States, instead of entering a land of freedom and promise, they're instead put into some of the worst parts of American life, namely child pornography, forced labor, or even forced prostitution.
And within the U.S., social media is used to facilitate child trafficking, and that's a much less obvious entry point. So how is that used in child trafficking?
Yes, so major social media platforms like TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram have all been indicted in these sex trafficking or even cases of pedophilia multiple times. And so what happens is traffickers will target typically young women on social media, start to build a friendship or romantic relationship with them. And then from there, once they've established a sense of trust, they will oftentimes start asking for provocative pictures or videos or to meet up in person. And it's just this gateway into major child exploitation issues with child pornography or even, again, sexual exploitation and prostitution. The worst part is this can take place under their parents' very roofs. So one study showed that of children ages 7 to 11, 55% of them were first contacted on social media by traffickers. So the ages of kidnapping are long past us, and now it's happening under our very fingertips.
Now, you've mentioned pornography a couple of times already. How does it come into this? And what kinds of pushback have we seen against it?
So with child pornography, this is actually one of the areas where we have a lot of hope when it comes to everyday Americans fighting back against this evil industry. So a couple of years ago, there was an article and a subsequent petition that highlighted the presence of child pornography on Pornhub, which is not only the largest pornography website, but also one of the largest websites on the entire internet. So after a series of petitions and work, Pornhub actually deleted 80% of their content, which equals about 10 million videos that were allegedly of children in pornography. So this is a massive win, because then after this, Visa, Discover, MasterCard all canceled any sort of relationship with them. And at this point, what was once one of the largest websites in the world is about to face financial ruin because people took a stand and said no to child pornography and the exploitation inherent in that practice.
And devour packages that look like these. It's actually not uncommon in some areas, in fact. As Business Insider mentioned in an article, the U.S. Coast Guard recovered more than $186 million worth of narcotics from the Caribbean and the Atlantic just last month. Sometimes packages of the drugs even wash up on shore. Now, according to The Guardian, scientists have been doing studies on this. They created packages that look like bales of cocaine, dropped them into the water, and they found that sharks would swim straight at these bales and take bites out of them. Now, if you were to read most of the establishment media, you'll be seeing a lot of stories around this lately. And this, again, cocaine sharks. The reality is it's now Shark Week, and the Discovery Channel and the whole, cocaine shark story is part of a feature they're working on. Now, look, I'm not trying to write off the possibility that sharks are eating bales of drugs, then, attacking swimmers. It is possible. And the amount of attacks being recorded, while apparently higher than normal, remember, it's not shockingly high really, which means the numbers actually could be feasible with that. But for me, there's very likely something else happening, especially with the water. It very likely does have something to do with drugs and chemicals as well. And for me, actually, this is the bigger story at play. You often have to read between the lines to get the real story. Look past the narrative and pay attention to what people are really saying. Take that Business Insider piece on the cocaine sharks, for example. Now, they mentioned something else. They say, what I personally think may be the real issue here, that wastewater may be the cause. And all the drugs and medication people take, all of that is being carried along in the wastewater. When The Guardian did its piece on the cocaine sharks, they also mentioned this point. In fact, Tracy Fanera, a Florida-based environmental engineer and lead member of the research team, explained this to the publication. She said this: "It's a catchy headline to shed light on a real problem. That everything we use, everything we manufacture, everything we put in our bodies ends up in our wastewater streams and natural water bodies, and the aquatic life we depend on to survive are often exposed to that." Now, part of this could be the massive amount of trash that gets dumped into the ocean. Take, for example, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. This includes trash and other waste products. We hear about things like microplastics, for example. And one of the bigger narratives, actually, is the dumping of garbage of whole cities into the ocean, is that controls are needed to prevent toxic waste from being dumped as well. But aside from the actual dumping of garbage, the relatively unseen problem is actually a bigger concern, at least in my opinion, and this applies to not just the coasts, but also to America's lakes and rivers. The less talked about problem goes back to that wastewater, plain human waste. It tends to be less regulated overall. Now, in some areas, they even dump it mostly untreated, straight into the ocean. Take, for example, Florida, notably, where they've had the problems of crazed sharks. The Sun Sentinel reported in 2017 that South Florida has been dumping billions of gallons of partially treated sewage into the oceans for decades. In order that sewage pouring into the ocean from 6 wastewater plants in the area, they are, quote, releasing massive clouds that cause the surface to look like it is boiling. Now, they're facing some legal pushback on it, but it will only end up really just ending the regular use of pipes by 2025. And this is bringing up a slew of other problems. Aside from the sharks and the fish, and yes, even the frogs, there are some serious concerns over how these chemicals are affecting us, affecting humans. Now, Democrat presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was canceled recently for discussing this. Interestingly, it goes back to an interview he did on his podcast in June last year. He spoke with David Carpenter, a leading expert on the impacts of toxic chemicals on human health. And remember as well that RFK Jr. is the founder of both the Waterkeeper Alliance and the Children's Health Defense. He's been on this topic for a while. What they discussed were the impacts that chemicals in the water and the air, in fact, are having on children. Part of this was the impact of neurological chemicals and IQ. But they also discussed the impact of endocrine disruptors and the way they impact child sexual development. Now, in a recent hit piece, interestingly, talking about the podcast he did a year ago, CNN brought this back up. It alleged that RFK Jr. has a history of repeatedly sharing unfounded conspiracies that man-made chemicals in the environment could be making children gay or transgender and causing the feminization of boys and masculinization of girls. Now, it quotes RFK Jr. from the podcast, stating his opinion that these chemicals in the water and the air could be contributing to the gender dysphoria we're seeing in children. Now, of course, CNN writes this off as pure conspiracy. He's a conspiracy theorist, they say. But it also points to some research which actually supports what he's saying. Now, look, after comparing RFK Jr. to InfoWars host Alex Jones and his famous claim that the water is turning the friggin' frogs gay, CNN points to a scientific paper that actually kind of supports that. The peer-reviewed paper from March of 2010 looked at the impact of an herbicide called atrazine. and notably the impact it's having on frogs. It notes that this chemical is also one of the most commonly used pesticides in the world, and is likewise the most common pesticide found in groundwater, surface water, and yes, in drinking water. It turns out that, as the study states, that atrazine is also a potent endocrine disruptor, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. And the researchers found that it was having shocking impacts on the sexuality of amphibians, like frogs. Now, this common pesticide was chemically castrating male frogs, leading them, as it states, to be, quote, completely feminized as adults. And it said, quote, 10% of the exposed genetic males developed into functional females that copulated, mated with, unexposed males and produced viable eggs. Now, it notes that other males suffered from things including reduced testosterone, suppressed mating behavior, and also lower fertility. Now, the argument from establishment news outlets is that, yes, the chemicals in our water are in fact causing feminization and even gender transitions, real ones, in frogs. But that doesn't technically mean that it's having the same impact on humans. That's the narrative. Just like the frogs, scientists are also seeing that the male fish are becoming feminized. And this has to do, interestingly, with hormone-disrupting drugs being found in the water. Several publications have noted this problem, including many scientific studies. In July 2017, National Geographic reported that, quote, scientists call this condition intersex, and while its exact causes are unknown, it has been linked to man-made environmental chemicals that mimic or block sex hormones. Now, again, it's debatable how much all this affects humans, but we know a couple important things. These chemicals are being found in lakes, rivers, oceans, and yes, even our drinking water. They're causing gender changes, chemical castration, and very odd behavior in fish and frogs. We do know some of these chemicals can do this to humans. Remember, it's why people take these drugs in the first place. And this is part of the whole narrative of using hormones and gender change procedures. That's all ending up in the water. Now, we know these chemicals are in the water. We know they're found in high enough density to impact fish and frogs. We know they have similar effects on humans. Based on all this evidence, is it then far-fetched to believe that these are also affecting humans?
And in addition, the head of NatWest, which is the bank that owns Coutts Bank, has also apologized to Nigel Farage. He's now preparing various lawsuits, complaints to various regulators. Everything's been going his way, really, since he uncovered in this 36-page dossier the real reason he was debanked.
Jeez, well, you use the word for it, which is debanking. It's kind of concerning we even have a term for that now. How common is it for banks to cancel people for their political views?
I think it's much more common than most people realize. There's a Facebook group called NatWest Closed My Account, and it now has over 10,000 members. I was debanked myself by PayPal in September of last year. They closed the account, both of me personally and of the Free Speech Union, the advocacy group that I run, and didn't give any explanation and no notice either. They were just closed immediately. And I kicked up a big fuss, and PayPal did a reverse ferret and reopened my accounts. But when it happened to me, I remember feeling quite embarrassed about it and slightly reluctant to talk about it. It was kind of like, a mark of Cain. I'm not a respectable enough person to have a bank account. And you worry that if you do go public about it, then it's going to be hard to open an account or get a payment processor to take your business after that. So I think many, many more people have been debanked than have been have come out and said it, because it's embarrassing. It's shaming. I imagine that it runs to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people in the UK. And Nigel, by being courageous enough to come out and talk about it, has, I think, lifted the taboo. And, the Free Speech Union has been contacted by dozens of people ever since Nigel Farage went public about what's happened to him, claiming that they've been debanked too, and we're helping them prepare subject access requests of their own, we're helping them prepare complaints to the financial regulator, and so on. And I hope that this will be a turning point. We've been lobbying the government, the Free Speech Union, since we were debanked last year, to change the payment services regulations to make it more difficult for banks to close the accounts of people and payment processors simply for political reasons, because they disapprove of their perfectly lawful views. And the government has announced that it is in fact going to change those regulations. So we're making some headway. The government says it wants to do more. The Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffith, is going to read the Riot Act to all the banks to tell them to stop doing this. So this could be a turning point. This could be the UK banking sector's Bud Light, Dylan Mulvaney moment. So I'm optimistic that things will begin to change.
Okay, well, comparison, President Donald Trump has a 45% positive and 49% negative rating. President Joe Biden sits at 39% favorable and 53% negative. So what does this mean for the 2024 elections? And more importantly, what can this mean for the future of the Democrat Party?